Good morning, All Saints. Good morning to all of you who are joining us. My name is Thomas Diaz, and my pronouns are he, him. And welcome to the Rector's Forum. Now, to begin, just to know, I am not the Rector of All Saints Church, Pasadena. That title belongs to Reverend Mike Kidman, and Mike is away this weekend, and I have the distinct honor to lead the Rector's Forum this morning. So I'm so happy to have all of you here with us, and a very good morning to all of you. Before we get into our program, we have a couple of housekeeping items that I will share with you this morning. Follow the Rector's Forum, we will go into our 11:15 worship service. And for those who are on Zoom, just a reminder, you will have to go to our streaming page to be part of the service. After the 11:15 worship, we will come back for a coffee hour. And then we will go into our last worship of the day, which is our bilingual 1 p.m. service. So stay with us throughout this joyful Sunday morning here at All Saints. We're so grateful for our Sunday food program this morning, and we're grateful that over 30 meals have been distributed this morning, along with 100 masks as we continue to keep our community safe. And thank you to Erica Temlin and the team who provided these meals this morning. When the pandemic started at All Saints, we began to support local communities, which had strong ties, and we call that Partners in Love. And this Sunday, we are partnering up with an organization called Young and Healthy. Young and Healthy connects undeserved children with free medical, dental, mental health, and mental health care through volunteer doctors. And also continues to help families with enrolling in insurance, medical insurance, and all the navigations with that. So if you would like to make a donation to this organization, please visit yhpasadena.org. Again, that's yhpasadena.org to make a donation for that. Well, we will go ahead and get into our forum this morning, which is titled, What is So Great About Spiritual Direction Anyway? And we are so, I'm happy and glad to have three spiritual directors to lead us in that conversation. And I would like to introduce them now. The first is Staci Kennelly. Hi, Staci. Staci is the coordinator of spiritual direction here at All Saints Church, and also has a passion for film photography in her leisure, and does that for fun. And Staci also co-leads the congregational response team, an important team here at All Saints in reaction to the pandemic and our lives together as a community. So Staci, so happy to have you here. Next, we have Carolyn Ash, right? And Carolyn is a lifelong Episcopalian, has been a member at All Saints since 2001, a graduate at Still Point's Art of Spiritual Direction program, and she has been a spiritual director for over a decade. And I'm so happy to have her with us here on the panel. And lastly, we have Greg Richardson. Greg, as coins this really well, is a recovering assistant district attorney, and also as a lay oblate with New Kamadaly Hermitage in Big Sur, California. And Greg writes a blog for a contemplative channel on hayfields.com and a monthly column on craft beer and spiritual life at dbelly.com, which is, you got me up on that one already. So sign up for that one, because how can we not pass something like that? So thank you for the three of you for being with us this morning. And so going with our subject of what is so great about spirituality, I think it's an appropriate first question to have you three answer. And that is, why is spiritual direction important, and why is it not important? How can we answer that? Why and isn't spiritual direction? What is the meaning of behind it for the three of you?
I think for me, in my experience, spiritual direction really grows out of asking questions. and telling our story. The people with whom I meet generally have a lot of questions. Sometimes they expect me to give them the answers, but often they understand that what we're doing is exploring the answers together. Sometimes they have very specific religious, what they call spiritual questions, and sometimes they just have general questions and they want sort of general answers. They feel a sense of dissatisfaction or frustration, or something isn't the way they expected it to be in their lives. And so for me, spiritual direction is really exploring that, getting an understanding of what is going on and why it's going on, and then talking about some ways that they can address that in practical steps.
Thank you, Greg, for that. Thank you.
So I would add to that and say that spiritual direction is about being with another as they seek, explore, discern, and deepen into their own spiritual life, knowing that we know our spiritual life and the interweaving of spirit within the experiences of our life, our relationships, our jobs, our families, all of the pieces of our lives, and exploring where is spirit within that.
Right. Yes.
We sit with people and hold sacred space. It's absolutely confidential, a safe space for people to come to that deep place within them and often talk about things that they've never talked about before and maybe weren't even aware of before.
Right. Yes. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, and one of our core values at All Saints is joyful spirituality. We believe God is love. Our trust in God's love makes us whole, worthy, just as we are, and able to experience the deepest joy in life from loving each other as God loves us. We continually strive to develop a personal understanding of the nature of God within us and our unique path of fellowship and faith. Through God's grace, we discover the silent essence of our communion and the exuberant joy of being. And I just feel like a spiritual director can help you in this quest to develop this personal understanding of the nature of God and experience this deep joy and love of the divine.
Mhm. Absolutely. Beautiful. Well said. Excuse me. Well said. And the way that we can approach spiritual direction in that way is important. So, Greg, why would someone want or need spiritual direction? Where would folks want to come into this ancient practice of spiritual direction?
I think that we've kind of touched on one of the really essential reasons that somebody would want to see a spiritual director, and that is that it's very personal. People will talk about things with someone maybe they don't know or that they've never met, but they really want someone who will listen. And so for me, spiritual direction, a lot of spiritual direction is listening,
Mhm.
and then asking insightful questions about what you hear. I don't think, well, a lot of the people I know are not looking for someone to tell them what to do or what to think or to give them detailed answers. What they want is someone to listen and to hear what they have to say and help them perhaps see their story in a new way. And that's really, for me, the essential reason somebody might want to see a spiritual director. I know people and I work with people who would not call themselves particularly spiritual, and they're not necessarily religious. They may not even go to a church or be involved in a church, but they want to talk through things with someone. They want someone who will listen, and they really want to explore in ways that they may not have been encouraged to explore in the other avenues that they've tried out.
Absolutely. And I think it is important to highlight that for many folks, maybe attending church or being part of a religious community, it's not what they think, but the fact that they could have a place to go and actually spiritually, be inward and be able to be listened to.
Mhm.
In that sense, as we all kind of come from our own stories and we need some guidance sometimes with that. So I think that was a great response to that.
Yeah.
So Carolyn, how is spiritual direction different from all the other types of deep listening? I mean, there are so many ways we can go into deep listening. We have meditation apps. We have all these unique, ways that folks can come together, especially during this time of digital age where folks have come over Zoom and different platforms to be with group. But what is so different with spiritual direction in this way that we can really in tune with deep listening in those practices?
Thank you, Thomas. So I'm thinking about how spiritual direction is the same and different from, say, psychotherapy or pastoral counseling. And certainly going to our apps, coming to our meditation groups at All Saints and other places where we do gather with others in the deep place and in silence and fostering our practices. And in the deep listening practices of, say, psychotherapy or pastoral counseling or spiritual direction, there are many similarities, certainly. And maybe where the differences are is in psychotherapy, for example, or even pastoral counseling. It's probably a more intense relationship. You come with something specific I need to work on. You may come with illness or deep wounding. You meet once a week or once every couple weeks. The therapist, maybe makes a diagnosis, does some analysis, helps guide you on a path towards your healing and wholeness. And spiritual direction is gentle. The directee, we call them directees, will come with the agenda, and it may be a different agenda every time they come. We usually meet once a month for an hour or so. We don't have answers. We don't know what is going on deep within someone else, but ask questions to help them know what they already know deep within them.
Right.
I have, I was just going to actually just read this because I can't say it better than this. So I'm just going to read this companioning philosophy that is such a good statement about what spiritual direction is and what it is not. Companioning is about being present to another person's pain. It is not about taking away the pain. Companioning is about going to the wilderness of the soul with another human being. It is not about thinking you are responsible for finding the way out. Companioning is about honoring the spirit. It is not about focusing on the intellect. Companioning is about listening with the heart. It's not about analyzing with the head. Companioning is about bearing witness to the struggles of others. It is not about judging or directing those struggles. Companioning is about walking alongside. It is not about leading or being led. Companioning means discovering the gifts of sacred silence. It does not mean filling up every moment with words. Companioning the bereaved is about being still. It is not about frantic movement forward. Companioning is about respecting disorder and confusion. It's not about imposing order and logic. Companioning is about learning from others. It's not about teaching them. Companioning is about curiosity. It's not about expertise.
That's beautiful, well said. Thank you, Carolyn, for that. You almost have to take a deep breath on that one.
Beautiful.
And it's a beautiful way to express and really point in what spiritual direction can do. And often I think we are so human and we want the answers, especially when we're facing a challenge or when we're going through our own life stories and trying to navigate through that. And I, with my own experience with spiritual direction, one of the things that I have most appreciated about this practice is getting very used to silence and really sitting in there. And that often when we're in that silence, it's not that the answers are coming, but something just kind of resonates in the silence that kind of leads you to a place where I'm here and I'm safe, and yet I'm being guided. And there's something just very mystical and holy and all the above that that can lead you into something like that. So thank you for sharing that with us. And Staci, so we've gone through a lot in this past year. That's just probably an understatement in saying that. And as we think about community, we were so used to coming together here at All Saints, worshiping together and belonging to all the ministries and programs that we have. And that was interrupted, and we were all asked to go and stay at home for the safety of ourselves and definitely of our neighbor. And now a year has come, and now we're back. Well, we're considering now a place of what we, of re-entering this camp that we have been so used to. And for some of us, that might be a decision that we don't do right away. It's going to be a process in how we kind of come back together as a community. But, what advice do you have as we consider a year long in this pandemic and what it means to consider options of being together in person again, knowing that we've had a whole year of being just separated and being away from each other physically, but have gotten to know each other through digital platforms? And what advice do you have in that spiritual sense? What do you foresee in that kind of new process, that in transition that I guess you can say that we're in?
Yeah, this last year has been a lot, and it's been hard for many of us. And I think that we can look at the last year as an opportunity to look at our spiritual lives, and we can ask ourselves some good questions. As we look forward, we can also look a little bit back at what did our spiritual life look like before the pandemic, right? And then how did that change during the pandemic? And maybe, there were some changes that were really beautiful. And so there were things that before the pandemic we need to leave behind. We don't need to take with us in this after space. There might be things that we've noticed that we don't want to take with us. Rushing. There might be a lot of us who have noticed, I do in fact need to slow down a little bit. I do in fact need a full day of Sabbath. And then also I would, ask myself, how do I want my new life to look different? What an opportunity we have. We get to go back and decide, what we want to go back into. Did we notice we had signed up for too many ways to serve? Did we notice that there might be gifts or things that we've learned while we were away that would help our community in our new ways we want to serve? Yeah, I think I would ask myself, what do I want to take with me in this new space? And what do I need to leave behind? I think would be very, would be helpful questions to ask yourself. And I would also ask myself, I think, what do I need from the holy? What do I need to ask the divine to help me move forward? This is going to be, I think we're all going to respond differently when we get back together. I think some of us are going to be afraid to meet again. I think some of us will feel very safe. I mean, I think, and I think we need to ask, what do I need? And feel that grace and power to ask the divine for those things.
That's absolutely. And as something that came to mind, it's almost like we have to give ourselves permission to ask these questions as well, right? As we kind of go through this process, and especially the part of what do I need to leave behind?
Yeah.
Because there's also a lot of loss that happened in this past year, which would then, we also have to recognize that part as well. It comes with our need to have to leave things behind and actually move forward with things that were also of a loss.
Yeah.
At the same time.
Yeah.
So I think, and what a process that is now and what's going to be, for some time. And with that, before I go to the next question for the three of you, I believe I forgot to do something, and that is our folks who are joining us here on Zoom. We want to hear from you. So if you have questions, you can use the Q&A box here on Zoom. We prefer that, but if you need to use the chat box, I will be looking at both, which bring your questions, and so we can, the four of us really could respond and to what you have going on, what your thoughts are. So a question really for the three of you. This can be open, and one of you can take a jab at it. Which kind of goes to what we're just discussing now, and that is just how has this pandemic impacted your spiritual life?
Yeah.
What have you seen? What has been your experience, and where do you find yourself currently right now, as we continue on through this pandemic, but yet seeing some light shine in different areas of just common life? Share with us what has impacted you the most during this pandemic time.
So I can say what that was like for me. Early in the pandemic, it began to feel to me like a pilgrimage. And a pilgrimage is we go into usually somewhere unfamiliar, a trip, another place where we have the opportunity and invitation to do some deep work. So we're in an unfamiliar place, and it's challenging, and we don't know what's next, and we don't necessarily know how to navigate whatever comes before us. And all of a sudden, it felt like I was on a pilgrimage within the most familiar place, my home. And I was here and couldn't really go anywhere, particularly out into my yard, but not out into public, not seeing people. Like everything was unfamiliar, even as it was so familiar. And I began to kind of think of my house as a hermitage and think of it as my cell. And what did my cell and what did this solitude, because I live alone, what did this solitude, this at-homeness, this pilgrimage have to teach me? And in the midst of it, I was with one of my directees who tossed off this phrase, I feel like an apprentice to stillness. And so that became, of course, her exploration, but it also became my exploration. What does stillness have to teach me? And I'm still journeying with that, and I'm going to take it out of the pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely. One of those pieces you take with you.
Mhm.
Right? Absolutely.
A gift. Mhm.
Gift, yes. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, for that, a gift.
Yeah, I feel like the pandemic, the time was definitely a period of some darkness, and I think in my life experience, I've learned that darkness is not always enjoyable or preferred, but it's where we can really look at the details of life. If you imagine you're in a dark room with no light and someone offers you a flashlight, all of a sudden the details are what we see. We only get to see small little parts. And so instead of our focus being on this big space, we can kind of look at smaller spaces and really ask ourselves some questions. So for me, the pandemic really was an opportunity to look at some areas in my life that I think I wasn't looking at and wasn't questioning. I was in a season of life of I was done with one thing and I was starting something new, and I think I was running full force, and I lost some of that stillness that I am naturally drawn to. And so the pandemic really reminded me that I was made for times of rest. I was made to be still and quiet. Um, and I not only enjoy those things, but they're good for me.
Yes, right. I would resonate with that last part. Absolutely. You're right. It's a challenge to find yourself to want to be still and rest. And I think that, what I heard from other folks is just that this was a time of having to, again, give permission to yourself to say that I now have to be still,
Mhm.
and almost have to wave this water that's going around us, because we didn't know what we were in the beginning of this. And
Right.
in time, we had to learn exactly what this was. And now is the challenge of how much of it do we take with us now,
Mm.
better ourselves and equip ourselves for, the next chapter as a human life and the human family that we have all shared together.
Mm.
Greg, I'd like to hear your response to that.
As I've reflected on it, I think that I see almost two different aspects of this. And I guess the way I think about it is there's the pandemic and there's the quarantine. I think the pandemic has been horrible. I mean, hundreds of thousands of people dying just in the United States, millions around the world. It's really a challenge for me to spend much time thinking about that, to try to understand that. It's
Mm.
pretty overwhelming.
Right.
But at the same time as that's happened, our reaction to that, our response was to spend time on our own. And I think there have been some benefits of that. There have been some lessons in that. I have found some ways to find stillness myself, but also I've found some ways to connect with other people. I've been attending church services across the country and all over the world. I mean, you can find all these churches everywhere. I've developed, communities of people spread all over the United States. And so there have been some real gifts, benefits. I mean, those have been very and continue to be very important and very meaningful to me. So I think there is it's almost an ironic, question that in the midst of this horrible situation, there are things, light shining in the darkness, I guess.
Yeah.
Light shining in the darkness, absolutely. And I'm, because of time, I'm going to ask one more question to the three of you. And I think it's an important one because I think often with spiritual direction, we talk a lot about the divine and the divine that surrounds us. And so why would we want to know that presence that is with us? What is the benefit to always in the spiritual practice of saying, why would we want to know what is the benefit of knowing the divine or what we call God? that is with us, and how does spiritual direction lead us into that experience?
Yeah. You know, I'm seeing one of the questions in the chat that I really want to answer. So I'm going to tie a question that's in the chat,
Okay, great.
what you've asked. So someone asked, many LGBTQ folks were spiritually abused in their childhood and teenage years, including one-on-one conversions with homophobic clergy. This could steer LGBTQ people away from spiritual direction, another one-on-one dynamic. That is true. What does the panel think about breaking through the fear with LGBTQ directees? And so to tie in what you were saying and this beautiful, brave question, yeah, 100%. And I would like to make very clear that every spiritual director on the All Saints list is LGBTQ affirming, and they will affirm the divine within you. There is, spiritual direction doesn't want to change you. No, you do not go to a good spiritual director for change. You go to find the divine within. You go to discover your true and real self, and coming out, is an important part of that. And so the spiritual directors at All Saints, I guarantee you, they're all affirming, and they will all journey with you. And, one thing we do, while we are not therapists, and so you will need to, attend therapy for some of the trauma, we can deal with spiritual trauma. And so some of that spiritual trauma, we will walk with you. And like Carolyn said earlier in that beautiful quote, we will sit with you in the wilderness, in that pain, and cry with you and hold you, spiritually in that sense. That question really struck me.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, I think it's something that there's a lot of spiritual abuse, I think, that's happened with a lot of people. And so it's clouded their idea of who they think God is. And I think one of the beauties of spiritual direction is we don't define who God is for other people. That's losing out on who the divine is. Everybody has a view of who God is and gets to radiate that to the world. And in spiritual direction, we 100%, we don't put out our beliefs on other people. We hold a safe space so they can discover their own beliefs themselves.
Absolutely. And I actually want to pull in a question here from Steve Williams, and I think it's a great one. And kind of tie in, Staci, what you were getting at, but no, from a racial reckoning. And Steve asks, how with the social unrest and the racial reckoning that we're having in our country, it does brought up the question, where is God in all of this, right? And where is the divine when we are constantly seeing the inequality of our systems out there being betrayed against Black folks and people of color. And so from a spiritual direction point of view, where is God in that? How can we go through an experience of understanding what we need to do spiritually to understand what we're witnessing on a daily basis?
Yeah. So in spiritual direction, we might go into what is the reaction that I feel when I see the images that we all see on TV? What is my experience of that, and what does that touch within me? And it touches all kinds of things. I mean, it touches anger. What is the anger? It's around the system. And maybe that leads me into what is mine to do, and how does my social action arise out of what's deepest within me? It might be, what do I notice about my own racism or my own biases around whatever is happening or whatever is stimulated? What is that trigger within me? And then how do I how do I be with that trigger so that it is not that? I think spiritual direction and our own spiritual explorations, however we do those explorations, comes from that deepest place within us that then allows us to respond
Right.
in the way that the divine within us invites.
Mhm. Thank you for that. Absolutely. And I'm also thinking that as we do kind of, go through these experiences, I think as community, there is still, I think, some of us who maybe have had a firsthand experience of these social inequalities, and having to really then figure out how is God, how is the divine with me, and my own personal experience with that, and I think, Staci, you mentioned it just a while ago, is that the point of also spiritual direction is that you will not tell me who God is to me. That is not your job or the job of the director, because that is a blockway of to how God is trying to respond to me and how God is responding in my own life. And the idea is to now hold that space for me, let's say, as an individual, to recognize who God is to me. Who is God to me when I'm out there on the street protesting? Who God is for me when I'm out there trying to, stick up and say that to this empire, this is not going to happen today, not on my watch, right? Who is that God to me in that? And I think once we allow that to happen more and more, it's almost an empowerment figure of just saying, like, we can own that divine that is within us. And that nobody has to tell you what it is and who it is. It's just, it is yours. And it's your force to use, for a force for good out in the world with that. So thank you for that. There was a question about companionship, and Carolyn, I know you kind of touched on that a little bit. Where can folks find more resources for companionship, and how can spiritual direction help with that?
Well, there are many, many resources all together. The companioning philosophy that I read comes from the Center for Loss, and it was authored by Alan Wolfelt. And I'm imagining that can be found online, or I'd be happy to send it to anybody. Yeah. As spiritual directors, we belong to an organization, Spiritual Directors International, which has a wealth of resources of all kinds. And so my own training, my own formation came through Still Point. Still Point has many resources that it offers on a regular basis: centering prayer, biospiritual focusing, monthly retreats, weekly chanting, as well as other programs, including the Art of Spiritual Direction formation program.
Absolutely. And there is a comment which I enjoyed reading from Tom Wiggins, who says a few months ago, Staci spoke about spiritual direction reform and thought it would be a great idea. Then in February, Mike Kimon mentioned his own journey of spiritual direction during a sermon, and right away, I guess Tom began his own journey with spiritual direction to All Saints, only a few months in it, and it is amazing. And thanks to the three of you for doing that. And so, Greg, I'm wondering, how, if folks are maybe a little hesitant about wanting to go into spiritual direction, but maybe this particular form is sparking interest. What are some ways that you can maybe relax people's minds and invite folks into this practice if they choose to do so?
What I usually do is if somebody is interested or has questions, I get together with them and either online, or I used to get together with them in person, but we sit down and talk. I give people an opportunity to ask whatever questions they have. If they want to know anything about me or anything about spiritual direction or the process, or if there are things that they want me to know about them, we sort of talk about that and, establish those lines of communication. I think it's really important to use communication to begin that relationship.
Mhm.
And so I don't think it's particularly complicated, but it can be a challenge to take that first step.
Absolutely. Another question to add to that is, how and when is prayer part of spiritual direction? I think that's a great question to ask. How and when is prayer part of spiritual direction, and maybe how is it used in your experience with working with a spiritual director?
So prayer, within spiritual direction, some directees come wanting to talk about their prayer life, prayer, how do they deepen into that, and about their practices, whatever those practices are. Maybe meditation, it may be art, it may be it may be a walking silently, all the kinds of practices that sort of support our spiritual life.
Mhm.
And so those can become topics of conversation. Often they do. And I always hold all of my directees in prayer on a daily basis. So they're surrounded by and encouraged and supported by that.
Mhm. Yeah. And I think when you meet a spiritual director, I think most of us will say all is prayer. There isn't
True.
much that isn't prayer. So, I think, but I do know if someone would like to be guided in prayer, that would, but again, that would be something they would ask their director. Again, it's a misnomer, really, a spiritual director, because we don't direct. I don't know why thousands of years ago they decided to name it that, but that is the name that has stuck through the times. But yeah, I think all is prayer. And I think that's one of the things I've learned through spiritual director, not only seeing my own spiritual director, but being a spiritual director. Each moment is a moment that the divine is inviting you into.
I love being a spiritual director because I usually tell people we talk about a lot of things that you might not think are very spiritual, and I'm not very directive. So it's the perfect description for me. I think prayer works differently with different people.
Mhm.
I mean, I pray for the people with whom I meet all the time, whether I'm
Mhm.
meeting with them at the time or not. But there's one person I meet with who is from a pretty different theological background than the one I have. And so what I would do is, as we got toward the end of our time, I would ask her if she wanted to pray, to close us. And so that became more of a game for us as to who could make the other one pray to close the session. And so that's what we do now, is we take turns and we try to get the other one in a position where they're the one who needs to pray.
And I'm also thinking another part to that question is how much we need to recognize that even being still in silence
Mhm.
as part of that prayer,
Mhm.
right? where it may not be necessarily a verbal, connection that you're making, but really that sometimes I would imagine that what we don't recognize often is when we're in that silence and we're taking that deep breath, how that is at its core a prayer in that moment, right? And having to recognize that part of when we're praying in that deep silence of it. And definitely has been my own experience in spiritual direction that often my favorite prayers are the ones that we do together in silence, and we're breathing together, and we're just recognizing that we just are in that presence. That's a beautiful part of it.
Yeah.
I do want to get to another one, and that is which, how, well, let's say this here, do cultural differences create challenges for spiritual direction? Which is, I think, an important question to ask. I think we all come from different cultural backgrounds, ethnicities, and I think, often when we're sitting or, however we are with another person, our biases can sometimes get in that way. Initially, we're human, and that's what we do. So how is that controlled in spiritual direction when you're working with your directees? Do cultural differences, do they show up? And does that create a challenge in the relationship that you're building with your directee? Anyone can take a jab at that one.
I have not experienced that it necessarily has, in that, again, spiritual directors are holding space for the other. So we are not defining what that space looks like. The directee is. And in fact, it's something that I love about being a spiritual director, is I've learned so much from others in holding their joys, hopes, pain, the way they see the world. Yeah, I don't know if the other two have something to say about that.
I would agree with that, Staci, absolutely. It's maybe a riff on the All Saints invitation. Wherever you are on your spiritual journey, we are here with you, wherever that is. And having said that, for those who come from different cultural, ethnic, spiritual, religious backgrounds, I always try to learn some things about that. And so being a spiritual director is definitely not a static. It's not static. It's not, okay, we went to school, we got our training, and now we just sit here. It's so dynamic. It's always changing. And the flow is not just back and forth between director. Actually, I'm also with you, Staci. I don't care for the word director. I like spiritual companion, because really it is about companionship. But it's also the flow through spirit, from the divine, has such a presence. And so there's that, but then also the opportunity also to just learn more and more and sink into what it means to be the human family.
I think those differences, I'm not sure if I like the word challenges, but to me, that's part of the reason to be in spiritual direction. That's a way that gives me more questions to ask. And, well, tell me about this, explain this to me, open that up for me. And so they're challenges, they're not really obstacles, I guess. There are more things for us to explore together.
Interesting way to pointed as more obstacles that maybe do get in the way. And often when we find ourselves in that place, the best approach is to stop and get curious and learn what is it, what is it teaching me on both ends. And I think that becomes that kind of like dynamic duo that you can have between the director and directee is you get to explore that together. And often you will discover something. Something will show up, and it just will be one of those like aha moments that like, yep, that was there the whole time.
And talking to people who are just like we are is boring. I mean, I'd rather talk to somebody really different and be able to find out something than somebody who's just like me.
Sure, absolutely, yeah, yes. And I see another question, actually, it's a good question to ask, is there a difference between spiritual direction and spiritual formation? Are they the same or are they different? And maybe in particular just in this practice of spiritual direction?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
I would say that they're different and the same. I would say spiritual direction is, for me, in my spiritual life, spiritual direction has been an important part of my spiritual formation.
There you go.
Yeah, I love being in spiritual direction. I love my director. She's amazing. And I would say that being our times together are part of my spiritual formation. But I'm responsible for my own spiritual formation, not my director. My director is a companion that notices and listens to me and notices things. And, I like to say it's like you're going on a walk through the wilderness, and a spiritual director is just someone that might notice things you don't. Hey, have you noticed we walked around this tree 3 times? Have you noticed this flower here? Did you notice, that you did this earlier on this path? It's just someone who's there to be with you. And so then it's my work to take that home, these questions home with me and go, oh, okay, yeah, I didn't notice that. Oh, why am I circling this tree? And so I think, I think there's just a small difference there.
Yeah. And I have to say, with my own experience, personal experience, spiritual direction, and this could actually, maybe I'm posing a question out to the group now I'm thinking about it. So I think, often what happens, and I'm going to phrase it as in what probably happens in at least in Western culture, is that when we go into let's say, particular learning program, we typically, when we become students, we like to sit down and we like to be trained and be guided and actually tell us, what we need to know, so we can just pretty much download it into our minds and go out and say, like, I learned something today. I didn't have to do anything because all I did was just listen. And then, they told me what to think. They told me what I needed to know. And now I'm good, I'm great. And I think what happens, especially in this particular practice, is that it's not that we are here, that you as a director is going to tell me how I need to think, how I need to feel, anything, right? I guess we're having now a discussion, like, what's the point of calling it a direction? Because it is formation. At its core. And I know that with my own experience with that is, it was those moments where Staci, I've had that too, when I walked out and just literally noticed something on the tree, right? And then that's when the mind starts to really get yourself like, I didn't see that before, like that was something I didn't know. And then it went on to a particular topic that I had with my director, and it left me at a place of saying, I didn't feel that I like missed a step along the way, or that it was my fault that I didn't recognize it, but I would not have not recognized it unless it was gently presented to me saying, hey, did you ever notice that this thing, did you ever notice it?
Oh, 100%.
Right. Yeah. And then for me, it did turn into a spiritual formation, And I would imagine with your directees, the three of you work with, do you see that? Do you see that sometimes happening, with the folks you work with and leading them to that formation part of it?
Mhm. Yeah.
Mm.
So I think of sort of the metaphor of a tapestry. When we look at a tapestry, we see whatever the image is, and it's so tightly woven with fine threads and yarns. And it's just so tightly woven, and we see what the image is. We see the pattern as a whole. And in spiritual direction, sometimes we need to sort of loosen that pattern to see what are the threads in it. And that's the process. How do we loosen the threads? And we loosen them ever so gently. And often as we loosen them, whatever that original image is shifts a little bit. It may just have a bit of a shift and everything looks different.
It does. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. It's good.
Well, I am aware of time, and so I do want to make sure that we are getting folks connected and into spiritual direction. So there are quite a few questions about how do folks get into the program? What does it look like at All Saints? So I'd imagine maybe Staci, if you want to go for a run through here and tell folks how can they get more acquainted with spiritual direction here at All Saints?
Yeah, email me. Email me, and I will set up a meeting with you and we will chat. And in our time, it usually takes about 45 minutes. And in our time together, I'll kind of listen to maybe your needs and preferences. And I will show you the list of spiritual directors we have available at All Saints. And together we'll just kind of decide on a few. I always say, please, please, please meet with at least 2 to 3 people, and they will go ahead and meet, schedule times with the spiritual director and meet with them, see if they're a good fit. And then if they're a good fit, they're on their way and it's a beautiful day for everyone. If we exhaust the list at All Saints, we can go to Still Point. We can go to Carolyn, mentioned SDI, Spiritual Directors International. So I do not give up. So I do not give up until the 2 of us help find you a spiritual director. But yeah, you just email me and I'll make an appointment to help you find one. Yeah. We have a great list of spiritual directors at All Saints. They really are a great group of people.
Absolutely with that. Yeah, so if it does come down that Staci go to Staci and Staci will find you a spiritual direction with that. And we're so grateful, beyond grateful that Staci can help lead this program here at All Saints. So I thank you for that. So with the last few minutes we have, any last remarks that you'd like to share with our community this morning? What has this experience been like for you? Let's put it that way here. Because I think this has been wonderful, just so enriching, but yeah.
There's a prayer I say when we're done with spiritual direction, when I'm with my directees. And the prayer is, as my soul grows quiet, I return to the astounding truth that at the heart of my being, I'm eternally loved. I rest in your embrace. And for me, that's, I pray that everyone knows that. I pray that people know that they are good and loved by the divine.
Great, or Caroline, anything you'd like to add to that? I think, one of the things that can be such a gift and being able to present a program like this is that for some of us, you know, maybe we've heard about spiritual direction before, maybe we've heard about all these other spiritual practices, and sometimes, you know, at first when we're first exposed to them, we don't do much with it, and in time, once you know they're reintroduced over and over, and they're available for us to recognize that they're there and present. You know, that's just how the spirit moves and works, and this is a place where this might take time and process if this is something you feel like you need to do. And I would say that in a program like this, that it's probably in the name, it does have to be spirit led.
Yeah.
To do that. And I think, Carolyn, I think you said that so wonderfully earlier about the difference between that psychotherapy portion that many of us do recognize and are familiar with. I think that this might be a place for us to do that, and yet this is offering something very different, but different in sense of, because it's that spiritual led part. Return, right? Then it kind of goes back to, but then we're being formatted into it, and then that spiritual formation really starts to take place. So I think I wanted to add that in there, that this might not be something that we all kind of hop in at first or think like, oh, this is something I need to do. But this really is a journey, and it takes time to really allow yourself, is this something that would be beneficial for me to do? And if it is, then we respond to it. And that's one of the great ways that you can get yourself into all the various practices that we have in our faith. So, and saying that, Staci, Carolyn, and Greg, thank you so much for this enriching morning and being able to talk and explore all things spiritual direction. This has been a gift, to me, and I know for the rest of the community. And let's do it again. And well, I really want to tackle on this idea of going beyond spirit, the idea of going on a director, that this is a companionship part, and I think that's a part 2 series, is putting it out there with that. And again, to all of you who have joined us, thank you so much. And we will now go ahead and prepare ourselves and get ready to go into worship. And you can join us again after worship for a coffee hour. And for that, I sign off, and we'll see you in worship. Have a good morning, everyone. Thank you. God bless.